This is Module 4, Introduction to the Cause and Effect Essay. This topic is kind of a jumping off point, or it's kind of jumping off of our first paper in which we talked about virtue, because now we're going to flip to the other side and we're going to be talking about vice. And a helpful concept for understanding human evil is that of the vice, which we might think of as a bad moral quality that results in specific negative attitudes and behaviors. Vices may be thought of as the opposite of virtues, as pride is the opposite of humility, or vices can be understood as the excess of an otherwise good quality, so that arrogance is an extreme of proper self-confidence. These are both different ways of thinking about vice. Different lists of vices may be found, but the 7 deadly sins of medieval Catholicism is a good example, and it's the one that people most often think of. These would be pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and lust. You're not limited to those. You can't only choose those. And it's also worth mentioning that those particular sins kind of go along with other pop culture ideas we have of vice. One of the best and best known examples of popular ideas about vice would be depicted in this picture here of Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove. He has a little devil on his shoulder. Often that's how we think of vice, as a kind of, and its opposite virtue, as the angel and the devil on the shoulder, kind of pushing you to go one way or the other. A few other ideas about topic to do with the idea of vice. Thinking in terms of vices is also useful when we're trying to understand why individuals are tempted and stray in particular ways. Because vices, just like virtues, develop and grow. Generally, a vice does not appear from nowhere. And as famed philosopher Yoda illustrates the principle, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. So this is a kind of cause and effect process or chain, and one way of thinking about vice. And understanding how vice develops is vital to conquering that vice. It's also a useful way to understand where vice comes from. So with all these things in mind, for this paper, in a 3 to 5 page essay, describe the causes that result in the vice of your choice. A really important thing to keep in mind with this paper is that what you are not supposed to be doing is you're not supposed to be saying what results there are from a vice. So you're not saying, here are results of lust. Rather, you need to flip it. You're supposed to be talking about causes. The vice should be the effect. So what causes are there that result in lust, the vice? That's your task for this paper. Some questions to consider as you are choosing a topic for your paper. First, what is the definition of your chosen vice? And does that definition hint at its origin? And this is also harkening back to the first paper when you were creating a definition of a virtue. So you should be familiar with the idea of a definition of a concept like virtue or vice. So thinking about the definition of your chosen vice can help hint at the origin. And that can even be true if you're just simply looking at the dictionary definition. That can sometimes give you a good jumping off point for thinking about causes. Another question to consider, is this vice a twisting of a good desire? So that all humans have a desire to eat food for sustenance, and that's not a bad desire. The desire to satisfy hunger is innate in humankind, but sometimes that good desire for food can be twisted into something like gluttony, a vice, in which the desire for food or something else, it doesn't have to be food, it's all consuming in a person. So that's what is meant by a twisting of a good desire. Another question, is this vice the deprivation of a virtue? Another way to think about vice is that it is a lack of a certain virtue. Final question, does this vice grow out of other vices? We talked in the previous paper about virtues being composed of other virtues, and that same idea could be at work here. You know, for example, could the vice of anger be growing from other vices, things like envy? Could envy lead to anger or wrath? Wrath is usually the word that people use. So that's another thing to think about, is if the vice can come from other vices. Specifications for the assignment, very similar to your first paper. Sources will be helpful and should be referenced. Again, this is true even if you're only referring to text included in the textbook. All sources should be cited in the text of the essay within text citations and listed at the end in a properly formatted works cited page. And all papers should be written in proper MLA format with a heading, title, page numbers, and 1-inch margins with Times New Roman 12-point font, and your paper should be double spaced. This is always going to be true because we're always going to be working with an MLA style. Hopefully this discussion has given you a greater sense of the cause and effect essay and what your task is, and will help you moving forward as you're choosing your topic.